Okay, today we are talking about Chapter 12, which is Adulthood, Body and Mind. So we are through emerging adulthood, and now we are at 26 to about 65 or so. Usually 30 to 65-year-olds feel about 5 to 10 years younger than their chronological age, but it really depends on how you've lived your younger years. Because whether you do bad things or good things, it still is a stress on your body and still takes a toll on your body. For example, you could be a drug abuser and drink alcohol every day, and that's going to take its toll on your body, and that's bad, of course. But you could also be playing sports and be really good at them and make a lot of money doing them, but that also takes a toll on your body. So that would be something good, but it's still taking a toll on your body. So it really depends on how you've lived your younger years. We talked about the allostatic load in the last chapter and how that is basically the accumulative effects of everything that you've done in your life. So this is where it really comes into play. So most adults consider themselves strong and healthy, but like I said, again, it really depends on individual themselves. But if you ask them, they usually will say that they're strong and healthy and totally fine. Adults in this age group actually contribute more to society than any other age group. Why? Because they're working, of course. When you are in emerging adulthood, 18 to 25, you still may be going to college, trying to figure out what you're going to do. So you're not contributing as much to society as this age group because they are usually all working. They haven't retired yet, so they're contributing everything they have to society. Senescence is the physical aging of the body, so this is a gradual physical decline, and your body becomes less strong and less efficient. It's, like I said, the allostatic load comes into play here. So that allostatic load is measured by 18 indicators of health and aging. And again, it's the accumulative effects of stress and aging on your body. So it's that organ reserve that you had when you were in emerging adulthood, that you had all of this strength and felt like you could do anything, so you usually did, is going to have an effect later on in life. How we age, though, differs, as I've said many times. It depends on the person. Some people age 3 years per chronological year. So every year they are actually old, they feel 3 years older, and their body is 3 years per year older, more wear and tear, so to speak. Others, they age less than 1 year per chronological year. So if they're 60, they may only have aged like a 55-year-old. Now, this is my favorite survey. They asked people, what age does the average person become old? So basically, it's asking you what you consider to be old. So think about that for a minute. What age do you consider to be old? If you look at this chart, the age of the respondents is at the bottom, and the age that they think is old is on the side there. So the dark blue is 18 to 29-year-olds, and they think 60 is old. The green is 30 to 49-year-olds, and they think 69 is old. The light blue is 50 to 64-year-olds, and they think 72 is old. And the purple is 65 and older, and they think 74 is old. So basically what happens is the older you get, the older you think old gets. So when you're in your 20s, you're like, oh my gosh, 40 is so old, 50 is so old. But then when you get into your 40s, you're like, oh my gosh, 60 is so old. And then all of a sudden you're in your 60s and you're like, well, I'm not old yet. 70, 75, that's old. And that's typical of everyone. The more they age, the older they view old age. So this is typical, basically. Exercise, of course, is going to help you, but you have to stay within your boundaries, within your limits. You don't want to get hurt, and you certainly don't want to put more stress on your body that's already aging. Studies show that 51% of adults meet that U.S. weekly goal of 150 minutes of moderate or 75 minutes of intense exercise, more so than 15 years ago. So what this basically says is that we are learning more and we are starting to exercise more. So we're starting to take better care of ourselves, and we're actually becoming healthier because of it. Of course, not everybody is exercising, but it's good that we're progressing in the right direction. The biggest thing is when you're going to exercise, you need to start out slow and then gradually increase. Don't start out running a marathon. Don't start out with 75 minutes of intense exercise. Take a walk around your block. Walk to, the store, walk to the gas station, whatever. Take your dog for a walk. That's how it can start out. And then progressively just increase your walks and increase the time you're walking, and then gradually increase the speed that you're walking. And over time, you'll find that you're handling more and more and more. You don't want to just jump right in and get hurt. So regular exercise can protect against serious ailments, but the biggest thing is your physical and mental health. Exercise helps your body get better physically, but also helps take off your stress. So as you are stressed throughout the day, you can come home and take a walk and kind of let it all go. Or you can exercise or hit a punching bag or whatever and kind of let all your stress go. So that helps your mental health. Now, these are also going to be influenced by family, friends, and your community, but you can do a lot towards your physical and mental health by simply taking a walk instead of, taking the elevator, take the stairs kind of thing. We've also found out that medication is playing a huge part in our lives. If you have something wrong, take a pill for it. So at least one prescription is held by 39% of 25 to 44-year-olds and 66% of 45 to 64-year-olds. Now, about half of those are for chronic conditions like high blood pressure or because of diabetes or back pain, that kind of thing. But that's pretty high number, 66% of 45 to 64-year-olds. That's more than half of these individuals are taking at least one prescription. And that's at least one prescription. That doesn't mean they're only taking one. It just means they're at least taking one. So part of the problem with our society is we want these quick fixes. We want it now. Everything we have is now. Technology is getting faster and faster, and everything is getting faster. So we want immediate relief. So we take a pill because we have a headache. We take a pill because we have a pain. We take a pill for everything. The problem is that if we just, take a walk, that might handle the headache or the pain. But we don't think like that. Commercials, of course, don't help. The biggest problem with this is tolerance buildup. The more pills you take, the more tolerance you're going to have to these pills. And it's all kinds of drugs. So prescriptions now for blood pressure and things like that, you're not going to develop a tolerance to. But ibuprofen, Tylenol, sodium naproxen, those things, you will develop a tolerance to. And while it may take one for a headache right now, if you take it on a regular basis, you're going to need 2 and then 3 and then 4. And pretty soon they're not going to work for headaches. So what I always do and what my doctors have always said is you rotate them. So if you have a headache one day, take an ibuprofen. And then next time you have a headache, take sodium naproxen. And then next time you have a headache, take a Tylenol. As long as you're not allergic or have reactions to any of those, of course. But kind of rotate them around so that you don't build up a tolerance. Psychoactive drug prescriptions are about 12% of young adults and 20% of older adults. And over-the-counter drugs are everywhere. Allergy medication, pain medication, they're everywhere. Now, the thing about illegal drug use is it actually decreases over adulthood, but the abuse of prescribed medication increases. We have this mentality that if it's prescribed, it's okay. So, yes, I have a prescription for this, so I can take as many of them as I want. I don't have to follow the label on the bottle. But the doctor gives you them for a reason and for a specific cause, and he tells you to take them in a specific way, so you need to do that. So even though illegal drug abuse does decrease, this prescribed medication increase is also a scary thing. Tobacco, cigarette harm is dose related, so the more you smoke, the more harm it does. But that doesn't mean if you've never smoked in your life, you're never going to get lung cancer. It also doesn't mean if you smoke 3 packs a day, you're going to get lung cancer. It just means that they're correlated. Tobacco causes more death than any other drug because of cancers and the harm that it does. Usage has decreased in the last half century, but fewer women have quit. And now this is going to be influenced by cohort and culture. How you were raised, what period you grew up in. For example, when I was a kid, there were ashtrays in all cars, and smoking was everywhere. It wasn't illegal. Everybody smoked. There were commercials for cigarettes on TV. The Marlboro Man represented Marlboro cigarettes until he died of lung cancer, of course. But there were commercials, poster boards, billboards, everything for cigarettes. And now you're not going to see those because a lot of things are prohibited. And it's illegal to smoke in a lot of areas, whereas before it wasn't. Cars no longer have ashtrays. It started out where they had ashtrays, and then they went to removable ashtrays, and now they just got rid of ashtrays altogether. So we see this trend going towards trying to have a non-smoking society. Adults who drink in moderation live standards. Now what this means, though, is in moderation. So we're talking a drink or two a day, especially if it's wine, because wine has antioxidant properties. So it will neutralize free radicals in your body, which can be poisonous if you have too many of them. Alcohol abuse does show age, gender, cohort, and cultural differences. You have a tendency to binge when you're younger and then kind of level out as you grow older. Again, how you grew up is going to impact it a lot, especially if you were surrounded by alcoholics versus, it was prohibited in your household kind of thing. So that's going to have a lot to do with it too. Research shows that low-income nations have more abstainers and more abusers and fewer moderate drinkers than affluent nations. So what this is saying is that low-income nations have more people that don't drink or go all out versus just have a drink a day than affluent nations like us. So it makes you wonder, why do these people go all out? We could understand if it's a low-income nation, they won't drink at all because maybe they can't afford it. But what about the people who abuse it to the extent? Where do they get the money from? Do they resort to crime to pay for the alcohol? And why do they not have moderate drinkers like we do? Kind of makes you wonder, though, huh? We are the world leader in obesity and diabetes. 66% of U.S. adults are overweight, and half of those are obese. Your metabolism cuts in 1/3 between the ages of 20 and 60, so that is a significant decrease. So as you age, your metabolism goes down. The increase in obesity rates cannot be blamed just on genes, though. Cultural influences are more important. Again, if you've been rewarded with food for your entire life, or if you've been punished by not getting food, if people who ate a lot were shamed when you were little, kind of thing. So how you were raised and your culture is going to be more important than the genes that you have as far as being obese goes. Our skin becomes drier, rougher, thinner, less flexible, and collagen decreases, so it's not as strong. So our skin actually becomes thinner, and it's not as flexible. And the layer underneath of fat starts to thin out. So older people have a tendency to be colder because their skin is thinner and they don't have that cushion. So when your grandma says she's actually cold, she's probably actually cold and not just crazy. So give that woman a blanket. Cells just beneath the surface are also more variable, and wrinkles start to appear, especially around the eyes. Now this lady in the picture here is getting a Botox injection. And Botox is a botulinum toxin. It's an attenuated strain, but the botulinum toxin causes botulism. So the goal of injecting Botox is so that our muscles don't contract, so they don't create the wrinkles. They paralyze them, basically. But you have to be careful, because if you are given a virulent strain instead of a virulent, if you're giving a virulent strain, so a harmful strain instead of a harmless one, it can kill you. It has killed people. Hair becomes to turn gray and starts to thin out. We have cells called melanocytes, which are responsible for the pigments, and those become less active, so our hair starts to gray. Our shape, we have our middle section start to spread out, and our posture changes. In our backbone, between the vertebrae, we have things called intervertebral discs, and those are cushions that their whole point is to absorb the shock throughout the day from walking. So if you measure yourself in the morning and then measure yourself at night, you're actually a little bit shorter than you were in the morning. However, overnight when you sleep, those discs have the ability to bounce back, and they become rehydrated, and you go back to your original height. However, as we age, that ability to rebound and rehydrate starts to die out, and the discs get more dry and they lose their flexibility. So you actually are a few centimeters shorter when you are older than when you were in your 20s. Our muscles start to atrophy because we don't use them as much. Our joint flexibility starts to go away, and we actually start to get really stiff. So as we age, our speed goes away, our strength goes away, and our agility starts to go away. So you can't, bounce around and run in a zigzag and do those tires anymore. Some people can, of course. This is all on average. Habits before you're 30 affect your health after you're 60, as I've said. Cancer is a big one. Everybody has the potential to get cancer, but obviously not everybody does get cancer. So smoking and things like that, of course, are linked to cancer. Now, it's not a given. There's just a correlation. Some genes are cancerous, so you might have the genes like the BRCA1 for breast cancer. Pollution can add to this. If you live around a lot of pollution, that's going to put that dirty teratogens in your body and can cause a bunch of problems, respiratory issues, and illnesses, and affect your health. Neighborhood stress, if you live in a bad area and you're worried about it constantly, that's going to add to your stress and diminish your health. Some adults actually become healthier, though, because they change their habits. They quit smoking or quit drinking or start exercising. So they do actually become healthier. Attitudes may influence this. They always say keep a positive attitude. If something bad happens, try to find a positive in it, and that could help. The socioeconomic status is in every nation. What they found is that well-educated, financially secure adults have a tendency to live longer, but there is something called the immigration paradox. Immigrants are usually healthier but poorer than native-born people of the same ethnicity. So they're healthier, but they don't have as much money. And what they find is that as their education level, income, and English fluency increases, so does illness. So it's a paradox because it doesn't make sense. Immigrants do not have as much money, but they're healthier. And as they be able to make more money, they get unhealthier. So that's a very strange situation there. As much as we may not like to think about it, older individuals do have sex. So sexual responsiveness is the ability to be aroused and orgasm. If there is a slower responsiveness, men and women both get distressed. So men will start to look for Viagra, and women will start to look for lubricants. Emotional satisfaction and physical pleasure are linked. So some adults actually have extremely satisfied sexual lifestyles. Infertility is most common in nations where they do not have good medical care and STIs are common. But 12% of U.S. couples are infertile. Some of that is because they postpone childbearing, but there are factors that impair physical functioning. You could have male infertility for a variety of reasons. It may be genetic. You may just not produce sperm. You may have had an injury, or you may wear briefs so that your testicles are held too close to the body, so they're too warm to make sperm. Female infertility can be a variety of reasons. Again, you could have ovarian cysts, you could have endometriosis, you could have issues with the uterus, you could just have genetics, blocked fallopian tubes. You may have had cervical cancer. There's a lot of reasons. So we have assisted reproductive technology. Advances in medicine have solved about half of all fertility problems. And assisted reproductive technology can overcome low sperm count and blocked fallopian tubes. In vitro fertilization goes a little further, where they take an ova and they surgically remove it from a woman, and they fertilize it with the sperm in a petri dish, basically, and then let the cells divide for a few times, and then insert them back into the woman's uterus. The problem with this is that they usually insert 8 to 10 zygotes so that they have a chance of implanting, because odds are not all of them, if any of them, will implant. It's also very expensive. It's about $15,000 around, and there is a very good chance that none of the embryos will implant. So you have to go through it all over again. So it's a very expensive technique, and it can be very trying on the couple, emotionally speaking. Menopause is when a woman's menstrual periods cease because their hormone production stops or drops a lot. Treatment is with a hysterectomy, so they take out all of their lady parts, so the ovaries, fallopian tubes, uterus. Hormone replacement therapy is where they just replace the missing hormones, so estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, depending on which or all of them have dropped. Now, hormone replacement therapy is one of those tricky things that you have to be careful and research before you do it, because there is a correlation between this and cervical cancer. So you want to be careful. If menopause is just causing some symptoms that are irritating you and you can treat those symptoms, you might be better off than going for one of these extreme treatments. However, if the symptoms are so bad that you cannot live day to day, you might have to look at one of these options. Andropause is the male form where testosterone levels drop and their sexual desire decreases and their erections decrease. So Viagra is the treatment of choice for them. The brain does slow down with age, though. We have slower firing neurons, and the axons do not pick up the impulses as fast. So what this does is it lengthens our reaction time. So whereas before, if you recorded your reaction time, it would have been a lot faster than now. So this can pose problems with driving because you don't have as fast of a reaction time. Major neurocognitive disorder, or NCD, is also known as dementia. This rarely occurs until 70 or older, and it does not usually correlate with intellectual depth. So if you are suffering from dementia, it doesn't mean you're stupid. It just means that you can't remember. And that can be a really heartbreaking problem for the people and their loved ones. Imagine, if you go to visit your mom and she has no idea who you are, kind of thing. It's a very sad thing. Pathological basically means disease connected. So these are not the result of normal aging. Drug abuse, poor circulation, viruses, and genes can all add to your brain aging by pathological means. If you abuse drugs to an extent, it can cause mental illness. For example, my sister used to be a big drug addict, everything and anything she could get her hands on. and now she is actually bipolar and barely able to take care of herself. Poor circulation can result in issues in the brain because if your brain is not getting enough oxygen and blood supply, that's going to hurt the neurons. Some viruses can start to deteriorate your brain, and of course, genes are going to always interact. They did early cross-sectional, longitudinal, and cross-sequential studies, and what they found was that the average scores on subtests declined, especially if it was timed. The overall intellectual ability was maintained, but their scores declined on time tests. So basically what that means is that the individuals still had the intellectual ability and still knew the information, but they couldn't do it in a specific period of time. Had they been given unlimited time to finish these tests, they would have done much better, but since they were timed, they didn't have enough time to finish them or enough time to think like they normally would have. So nature and nurture, as always, interact, and it's going to be a little bit of both here. We have types of intelligence, fluid intelligence versus crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence are basic intelligence that makes learning quick and thorough. So working memory, abstract thought, how fast you think, this is fluid intelligence. So kind of the now, what you're working with now, how you're thinking now, how fast things are going now, versus crystallized intelligence, which is accumulated learning over time. So vocabulary and general information are examples of this. So it's fluid, being in the present, what you're knowing, what you know now, what you're learning right now, how you're thinking now, versus crystallized, which is over your lifetime, what you've accumulated. So you learned how to read, that kind of thing. Sternberg also added analytic, creative, and practical intelligence. Analytic is valuable in high school and college because, as the name implies, you can analyze various ideas. Creative, as the name implies, is innovation and flexibility, so your creativeness. And practical, as the name implies, are skills used in everyday problem solving. So practical intelligence is needed in adult life. It cannot be assessed by abstract testing, but it's crucial on the job because you have to know what you're doing and you have to be able to solve problems every day. Even if it's as simple as what you're going to have for dinner, you have to be able to solve that problem and figure out what you're going to have for dinner. If you get a job, you have to figure out how to do that job and how to do that job well and efficient. So they often have probationary periods where if you don't do well in the first 90 days or whatever, they will fire you. Or they'll have internships or apprentices where they don't get paid for their work immediately. They have to go through this internship or they have to go through an apprenticeship where they learn on the job and then they can get paid after that. Each culture has its own concept of intelligence. We have cognitive artifacts, which are kind of like things that we've brought through down the generations. But this woman is a multitasker, as you can see. And what they found is that if you can multitask, you're more likely to survive and live longer. So aging neurons, cultural pressures, and historical conditions can all affect adult cognition. So again, you do not have the speed of thought that you used to have. Your neurons are not as plastic as they used to be. And what you have learned through the years can all impact how you think now. So stresses are external. However, some of these stresses are internalized and become stressors. So if you internalize these external stresses, they become stressors in your own life, and they can be detrimental to your health. For example, we all saw the Las Vegas shooting, but most of us were not there. But if we internalize that stress, it can become a stressor in our own life. Or the Houston hurricane, or the New Orleans Hurricane Katrina, all of those external stresses, if you were not there but you internalize them, they can become stressors in your own life and be detrimental. Obviously, if you were there, that's a whole other thing. But we can't internalize these stresses and hurt ourselves. Globalization and high-speed communication adds to this because we can see things that happen far away, even in other countries, and we can then internalize them in our own lives. However, personal stressful events are more common because every life has many minor stresses. Nobody lives a stress-free life. No matter who you are, no matter what you do, you have some sort of stress in your life. So adults use various ways to cope with stressing. We have two main ways: problem-focused and emotion-focused. Problem-focused coping, as the name implies, you attack the issue directly, so you go right at the problem. Emotion-focused is when you try to change the feelings or interpretation about the stressor. So as I was saying earlier, kind of try to turn a negative into a positive, try to look at it from a different way. So it's tackling it head on compared to trying to look at it from a different point of view, look at it from a different way, so you cannot be so hurt by it. Social support is important. We have gender differences, of course. Fight or flight usually is the male. Either you're going to run or you're going to fight the person. Tend and befriend, usually the female. But this is much smaller in reality than in what we assume. We assume the guys are going to always fight or run, and females will always take care of everybody and make sure they're friends and make sure they're okay. But that's not the case in all times. Overall, social context may diminish or increase the stress, so it really depends. Racial discrimination is still a very real thing in the world today, unfortunately. So this is something that we'd like to think is diminished over time, but in reality, has it really diminished? We have to ask ourselves that. And as much as we try to say, well, we're all an equal world now, think about some experiences you may have had or may have seen where you realize that it's not the okay world that we think it is. It's not the great things that we think it is. And we really have to start thinking about other people and how we act and react around them. And we have to start helping them and protect them from these horrible things that we used to do and these horrible things that we used to say. And we need to stop it and not do and say these things anymore. And that's harder for some people than it is for others. Selective optimization with compensation happens when you have a cognitive loss, but you try to do something to kind of avoid that. So, for example, if you can't see very well, you get bifocals. Or if you can't see very well, you get big print books. Or if you can't drive at night because you can't see, you just avoid going out at night. Or you'll specialize in something else to kind of offset that cognitive loss. The best effort, though, may wane when older adults are not motivated. So if they don't care that they can't see at night, they might go to Walmart anyway because they want something. So it really depends on the person again, and it depends on what we're talking about exactly. What is the cognitive loss? Is there something they can specialize in to overcome that cognitive loss and kind of replace it? Or are they just going to keep getting frustrated? So we have to look at all of these things. Experts are people who are more skilled and knowledgeable than the average person. They're more intuitive, automatic, strategic, and flexible in whatever their chosen field is. So this shows you they're more intuitive, automatic, strategic, and flexible. But the very important thing is that it's in their field of expertise. So experienced adults usually use selective optimization with compensation to become experts. So they will trade one thing for another. So if they can't do something, they'll try to specialize in something else. And the brain will adapt as they become experts. Now, the red portions on that brain there are activated areas of London taxi drivers. And the longer that they drove, the more growth there was. So the more redness there was. So that kind of shows you that the more experience they had, the more their brain changed and the more redness and activating the more areas that were activated when they were driving. So the more they learn the city streets and the more they learn the city itself, the more areas were activated in their brain. And of course, this is plasticity. So the brain changes based on what you're learning, what you're becoming an expert in. Okay, so that is all. I will see you next time. Bye.